Chicken stock is great and versatile, but sometimes it just won't do. Sometimes you need something deeper, richer, heartier, but still just as versatile.
Someone thinks highly of himself.
That's not what I guess it could apply to me, but no. What I'm talking about is brown stock. There are two types of brown stock, beef stock and veal stock. Let's talk about veal for a minute. Veal comes from an adolescent cow.
A baby cow?
Usually harvested at around 6 months of age.
Well, that's longer than a turkey gets.
Exactly, and at that age they are already 500 pounds with many laws that have been passed to ensure humane conditions. Most veal comes from New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Wisconsin, with the rest being imported from other countries. They're milk-fed and given a meticulously crafted feed to grant them the best nutrition possible. If you don't feel comfortable using veal, I do understand your reservations. But here's the rub. No, not barbecue rub. The rub is the farther away you are from these states, the harder it is to find a selection of veal products, especially the cheaper, less sought after cuts we would want to make stock with.
Well, can we just use beef bones, from older cows?
About 4 years older, and yes, flavor-wise, there are some differences. Veal has a clean beef flavor that is mellow and quite pleasing. Beef bones, on the other hand, will yield a more pungent beefiness, and trust me, there is nothing wrong with that.
Well, pungent beefiness.
Since for the life of me, I couldn't source the veal bones needed for veal stock, we will just be using beef bones. We'll be using them to make 1.5 stocks today. We'll cover that one at the end. For now, let's talk about the bones. You can look for any bony beef bits at the store.
Bony beef? You find that next to the pungent beef?
My go-to, however, is neck bones. It is usually pretty cheap since there isn't enough meat to justify doing much with it other than soups and stocks. Not all stores will carry this stuff, but if you talk to your local butcher, you can usually request it or easily order it online. I also recommend adding some split marrow bones as well to get that extra richness. And the ratio of bones to water is the same as we covered with chicken stock. 2 parts bones to 3 parts water. Now, if any of this was veal, we could throw them in the pot immediately with water to get white stock, but since we are working with beef, we have some additional prep work to do.
Wait a minute. How do you have half a stock? And why can't you make white stock with beef?
You need to let that go. Anyway, the reason you wouldn't want to attempt a white stock with beef bones is that in their current state, you'll end up with a sweaty beef flavor. Not good eating. Instead, to get the desirable flavor, we need to roast these bones. To roast your bones, first pat dry with a paper towel. Then coat lightly in oil before placing them in a 450-degree oven. Use tongs to turn every 15 minutes for about 45 minutes until browned on all sides. Then transfer them to your cooking pot. We are also going to want to take a bit of our cooking water to rinse and scrape off the roasting pan as much as possible, as there is a ton of flavor there, and here, we don't leave flavor behind. Before we add the water, let's talk once again a bit about what you can add to your stock. You could keep your stock with just the roasted bones, but I think it is best to add the aromatics of onion, carrot, and celery. The French call this mirepoix, and it is traditionally 2 parts onions and 1 part each of the celery and carrot. Or, if you want a traditional Vietnamese pho flavor, you could char that onion and add cinnamon, ginger, or galangal if you can find it, star anise, and cardamom. Since I am not making pho today, I'm going to stick with the more classical mirepoix. I find it complements the beef flavor without competing. Speaking of complementing flavors, if there is one ingredient that I think should almost always be included, it's tomato paste. It adds a hint of sweetness and acidity that pairs beautifully with the beef flavor. It also enhances the color nicely too. And same as with the chicken stock, leave the salt out of your stock. You can always add some later in your final dish. For cooking, the best method is the pressure cooker since it only takes 2 hours. But stovetop, slow cooker, or in the oven for 8 to 10 hours will certainly do. I find it best to load the meat first to ensure it remains completely submerged in the water. Remember, the connective tissue needs the water in order to be converted to gelatin. The vegetables should still be able to be submerged, but if they aren't, the heat and pressure will still allow for their cell walls to break down, releasing their flavor. Plus, it is easier to separate and discard them without losing any of the meat and bones after straining. More on that in a bit. We strain the stock the same as we did with the chicken stock, using a slotted spoon to evacuate the bones. But instead of throwing them out, we'll set them aside and discard only the vegetable solids. Those bones still have more to give.
Oh, is that for your half a stock?
Sure is. Let's return the bones back to the now empty pot and prepare it for remoilage.
Remoilage?
It basically means to wet again. We just need to barely cover the bones with water and start the cooking process all over again, cooking it for the same amount of time as before. The flavor won't be as strong and there isn't as much gelatin left to extract, but trust me, it is worth the extra bit of effort. When it's done, you can either use as is, or you can add it to your original stock to increase its yield, which is what I like to do. The combined stocks will be plenty rich, full-bodied, and flavorful. I like to strain the remoilage right into the original stock, but instead of discarding the bones and meat, I know someone who will appreciate them, along with some of the spent carrots from earlier. Good boy. I think it makes sense to always make rather large batches of beef stock, but I rarely need too much at any given time. I'm usually only using it to add to slow-cooked roast or to make a bit of sauce. I like to take what I don't plan on using within the week and freeze it for later. Here is how I do that. This is silicone mold, technically meant for soap making. I like this one though because each square holds just over 4 ounces or half a cup. I like pouring 4 ounces and leaving that bit of headroom for expansion in the freezer and to reduce spillage. This amount makes it easy when I want to add one to zhuzh up a dish or grab 4 to make a pint of sauce. It is easiest to ladle your stock into the mold while it is still warm and the gelatin hasn't had a chance to set up yet. Then I chill it in the fridge where it will set like jello before transferring it to the freezer. Once frozen, I vacuum seal the individual bars before tossing back into the freezer so they last longer. And there you have it. I decided to go ahead and keep them separated so I can show them to you side by side. As you can see.
So good.
As you can see, visually, they're virtually identical, and flavor-wise, they're both rich and delicious. When it comes to beef stock, it's worth doing it twice.